Good afternoon. We're going to be doing video notes today. Please understand that the expectation is for you to get this note packet out and fill this last piece in. If you do not have the note packet, then what you need to do is you need to get out another piece of paper and just copy down these examples. All right? We're going to be looking at solving absolute value equations today. And first, remember absolute value. We've been looking at how to graph absolute value functions. But what absolute value means is it means the distance a number is from 0. So when we see something like the absolute value of 8, 8 is 8 units away from 0. If we see the absolute value of -5, -5 is 5 units away from 0. So that's what absolute value means. Well, an absolute value equation is an equation that contains an absolute value, basically with a variable inside. So a very simple example is this equation here. The absolute value of x equals 5. What that really means is that the distance between x and 0 is 5. And so it's saying, what are some numbers that are 5 units away from 0? And when you think about it on the number line, 5 is 5 units away from 0. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And -5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is also 5 units away. So that means that the solutions of that equation are x equals -5 or x equals 5. So notice we have two solutions very often. Okay? So remember that when you solve an absolute value equation, remember that the absolute value is representing a distance. So the distance itself must be non-negative, but you can move in either a negative or a positive direction, hence getting two solutions to these equations. So here's kind of the rule. When you have an absolute value equation, so you have the absolute value of a bunch of stuff equals C, where C is just a number, what we're going to do is we're going to split this into two different equations. We're going to split it. We're going to always keep what's on the inside the same. So each equation is going to end up with ax plus b. But what's inside could be negative, or what's inside could be positive. So those are the two equations that we'll use. We'll split it. We'll say that ax plus b equals the opposite of c, or ax plus b equals c. So here are some steps we're going to use to solve absolute value equations. The first thing we're going to do is isolate the absolute value. So that's the first step. So we want to make it look like this first. So we want nothing on the outside multiplied, nothing on the outside added. Okay? Then we're going to look at C. If C is positive, we'll continue. But if C is negative, then we say there is no solution. Why would we say that there's no solution? We're saying that the absolute value is equal to a negative. Well, that doesn't make sense. We know absolute value can never be negative. So there is no solution because the distance, absolute value, because that's what absolute value is. Absolute value is a distance. That absolute value, that distance, can never be negative. All right. So we'll look at that and make sure we don't have any negatives. Well, let's say that we're able to continue. The next thing we'll do is we're going to create an equivalent statement. And so this is where we're going to rewrite. So we're going to rewrite as two equations. Then we'll solve each equation for x and check our answers. So let's try that in example 1. Example 1, this says to solve if possible. Well, first, let's isolate the absolute value. There's nothing on the left, nothing on the right, so we are all set. That is good. So then let's look at C. C is positive. So we're able to rewrite this equation. And we're going to rewrite it in two parts. We're going to say x plus 4, that inside part is going to be part of both of them, okay? But we're going to set 1 equal to negative 3 and 1 equal to positive 3. That's our step 3. Splitting it into two equations. Maybe we'll write a little split here in number 3, sorry, just to remind you guys. Okay, sorry. All right, so now step 4 is we're going to solve each equation for x. Here to isolate x, I would just subtract 4, and I get x equals negative 7. In this equation, to isolate x, I would subtract 4, and I get that x equals negative 1. And notice I have two solutions. You can just leave it like that. Traditionally, technically, we're supposed to have an or between it, but it's cool if you don't have it. As long as you have these answers, I'm a happy girl. And it's a good habit to check. I won't since these are video notes, but like if you put negative 7 in, we would have negative 7 plus 4, the absolute value, and that's the absolute value of negative 3, and that is equal to 3. And if we put negative 1 in the original equation, then we end up with the absolute value of 3 equals 3, and again, that's true. Okay? Let's do another one, step number 2. The absolute value of x minus 1 equals 3. So look back at our steps. First, isolate the absolute value. Nothing on the left, nothing on the right of it, so we're good. Next, check to make sure that C is positive. Once again, it is a positive 3. So now we're going to split it into two equations. We'll use x minus 1 in both equations. 1 will be equal to a negative 3. 1 will be equal to a positive 3. And now we can see we've split it into those two equations. Step 4, solve. Well, here we just have to add 1 to both sides, and I get that x is negative 2. Next equation, I add 1 to both sides. I get x is 4. Technically, I like to be a super good student, so I'm going to put or between, and those are my two answers, x equals negative 2 or x equals 4. Let's look at example 3. 3 times the absolute value of 4x plus 2 minus 7 equals 11. Well, let's look back at step 1. Isolate the absolute value. We don't want anything around it. Look, we have a bunch of stuff around this guy. So think about if you were solving an equation, what would you get rid of first? Well, we would probably get rid of the addition. So we would have to add 7. So I have 3 times the absolute value of 4x plus 2. These cancel. And then 11 plus 7 is 18. Is the absolute value isolated yet? Doesn't look like it. We have this 3. What operation is separating the 3 from the absolute value? Well, it's multiplication. So I would have to divide by 3 for these to cancel. And now I have the absolute value of 4x plus 2 equals 6. Now my absolute value is isolated. Notice I don't have anything extra. So now step 1 is complete. Step 2, let's look at C. It's positive, so we're able to continue. So step 3, it means we'll write those 2 equations. Both of them will have 4x plus 2. We always keep the inside the same. But that inside could be a negative 6 or a positive 6. And now we'll just continue solving. Let's work at the one on the left first. We could subtract 2. I have 4x equals negative 8. Not quite solved yet. I'll have to divide by 4. And I get x equals negative 2. Well, let's solve this guy. We could subtract 2. 4x equals 4. Divide by 4. And so x equals positive 1. I'm going to stick my or between it and make my final answer clear. And that's the gist. Let's flip to the back. We've got a couple more examples just to do together to make sure we've got it. In example 4, notice I'm not going to split yet because I need to isolate the absolute value part. And I know it looks like a negative right now, but we can't make that decision until we complete step 1. So we would start by adding 6, and that gives me negative 3 times the absolute value of 5g plus 1 equals negative 3. If I take negative 9 plus 6. Okay. Not isolated yet. That's still in the way. So let's divide by negative 3. And I have the absolute value of 5g plus 1. And then negative 3 divided by negative 3 is just 1. Now, my absolute value is isolated, so that's step 1. Step 2, double check that it's positive. We're good. So now we can split. We're going to have 5g plus 1. We're going to set that equal to a negative 1. And we're going to say that 5g plus 1 is equal to a positive 1. Just a reminder as to why. Remember, because we could go in a negative or a positive direction. All right, so let's continue to solve this now. To solve the equation on the left, we would start by subtracting 1. So 5g equals negative 2. Okay. Divide by 5, then I get g equals negative 2/5. We don't really like fractions, but it doesn't matter. That's a totally valid answer. Let's solve the other one. We would subtract 1. 5g equals 0. Divide by 5. I get that g equals 0. And so here are my two answers. G is negative 2/5 or G equals 0. Number 5. We need to start by isolating. So there's a bunch of stuff in the way. We should get rid of this 3 first by subtracting. And so I have 3 times the absolute value of 2x minus 8 equals -1. And then I would divide by 3. And I have the absolute value of 2x minus 8, because these 3's will cancel, and then equals -1/3. So notice I got rid of everything on both sides. So step 1 is complete. So now we need to look at step 2. Make sure that C isn't negative. Uh-oh, this is negative. And we're not allowed to have an absolute value that's negative. So remember that the absolute value cannot be negative. I'll say cannot equal a negative number. And therefore, we would say that this has no solution. So you can jump right from that negative value to no solution as long as it's isolated. You've got to make sure we do step 1 first and isolate the absolute value. And then if it's negative, we can say it's no solution. And we're already done with number 5. Number 6. Well, let's isolate the absolute value. We would start by subtracting 12. I have -5 times the absolute value of 2x minus 6 equals -10. And we might be tempted to look, but we have not isolated the absolute value. That -5 is still in the way. So I'll divide by -5, and I have the absolute value of 2x minus 6, because these cancel. And then that equals -10 over -5. That equals +2. And now step 1 is complete, since I've isolated the absolute value. Next, I take a look and make sure that C is positive. It is. So that means that I can split it into 2 equations. 2x minus 6 will be involved in both. Remember, 1 is going to equal a -2. 1 is going to equal a +2. And we want to solve both of those. So, we solve by adding 6. And then we continue isolating x by dividing by 2. And I get that x is 2. Now we solve the next one. We, again, add 6. But this time we add 6 to +2. And then we continue to solve by dividing. And we get that x equals 4. And so we have 2 solutions, x equals 2 or x equals 4. Okay? And that's the gist. And I'm going to let you guys get started. The U-Try answers are on the website. I'll write them here real quick just so you have them in case you want to double check, or in case some of you, to be polite and not disruptive, may have worked ahead. And so if you did, these are the solutions to the U-Try problems, okay? So that's it. That's solving absolute value equations. This video is available on the website in case you felt I went too fast and you want to go back to it. You have that to refer to, okay? Now, do your homework the rest of the time. Have a great weekend. Feel free to send me a remind one-on-one message, personal message, if you have specific questions. And that's it. Thanks a bunch. Have a good one.